here at Synergy 21. My name is Andrew Makinga. I'm your host this afternoon. I'm so happy to have you with us. We had a panel discussion with Caroline de Gruyter and three scholars, and Shoshanna Zuboff, who was just here online. And we will continue with the PhD Award, the Synergy Award 2021, coming up later, the end of this afternoon. But first I'll be speaking to someone who is an associate professor at the Tilburg Institute for Law, Technology and Society, TILT. She leads the ERC-funded Global Data Justice Project, seeking to understand the different perspectives worldwide on what constitutes just treatment through data technologies. And her research focuses on the use of new sources of digital data and governance and research around the issues of human and economic development. Very interesting and totally in sync with what we are discussing this afternoon. Her name is Linnet Taylor. Welcome, Linnet. Welcome to Synergy 21.
Thank you. Hi, Andrew.
It's an honor to have you. I just wanted to say that before we go to your reaction on even what Professor Zuboff said, we've been having people on the Q&A this afternoon. One-on-one Q&As, but also just sending in questions, giving us feedback, and we're really happy that you're using the hashtag Synergy21, but also getting there with the Q&A button on the right side of your screen. But I want to try something else, because we figured let's throw in something that you can react on, a poll. Academia has an activistic role in securing a better digital future. We are really interested in what your thoughts are on what you can see on the screen now. So if we could just take a minute before we go to Associate Professor Linnet Taylor, just get on screen and answer the poll that you see there. Academia has an activistic role in securing a better digital future. What do you think, Linnet Taylor?
Well, I certainly work on that, so I hope that we do.
Yeah, I'm also very interested in what everybody has to say. We have 66 votes. 92% is saying yes. 6% does not agree. Let's give it some 15 seconds. One more time, you can answer the poll. Academia has an activistic role in securing a better digital future. Oh, well, that's really working out. Let's see. Well, that's very clear. 91% agrees and 8% does not agree. And I think that's more than enough. Thank you for letting us know what your thoughts are. Keep on doing that either via the hashtag Synergy21 or getting to the right side of your screen, and the Q&A button is there for you. We'll be in a Q&A with Linnet Taylor. But first, before we listen to you, anything to say about what Professor Zuboff just said?
Well, my response deals with what she said. So would you like me to...
Shall we just go ahead? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I was interested in what Professor Zuboff said about how lawmakers and the public may just be waking up to this problem, because social science and humanities researchers have been working on it for many decades, as she correctly points out. I would start by highlighting two different perspectives on this issue. First, Professor Zuboff's take on commercial surveillance, which is that it's absolutely exceptional, markets are running amok, it's a fundamental challenge to democracy, and that people need new rights and legal frameworks to deal with it. Basically, that we're like helpless children in relation to the power of commercial tech. There's a second view on this as well, though, which is that the problems that Professor Zuboff highlights with behavioral data and ad tech, which are primarily what she's talking about, are the tip of the iceberg of technological power. So, like Professor Zuboff, a whole field of researchers has been working on this problem for decades. And if we take our direction from all the work being done in the social sciences and humanities, we get a little bit of a different picture of what is known about the phenomenon. We could start from the work of Manuel Castells during the 1990s on how digitalization for 3 decades by that point had been creating a more effective and flexible and what he called hardened capitalism. I'm quoting, though, from a review by Professor José van Dijk at Utrecht, who disagreed with Castells' idea that technology can by itself determine social outcomes. She argued back in 1999 already that if we reduce our analysis of technology to looking at its effects, we leave ourselves no political choices for dealing with it. Similarly, Oscar Gandy back in the early 1990s was already arguing that the infrastructures that make surveillance profitable are not exceptional. They're shaped by political and legal and social choices. Other scholars like Christian Fuchs, Julie Cohen, many others have looked more deeply at the structures that underlie the rise of informational capitalism, including monopolies, but also social inequality and discrimination per se. Democracy and law are not a magic wand that we can wave at technology and change its effects, because technology is a symptom of the way we've built our current political and financial systems. So if we want to understand this problem better, we really need to do a good job of translating between the effects we see in the world and the analytical tools that we can bring to bear as researchers. So I was going to take these few minutes to look at some of the work that social scientists and humanities researchers have been doing in the Netherlands on this problem. So first, the same infrastructures that produce the effects Professor Zuboff highlights are very busy in other fields which have even greater effects on the world's democracies. And also, lest we forget, on the billions living in less democratic states who would also like an answer to this problem. They're used in defense contracting, in migration control, national identification systems, finance. They're used in fraud detection by the tax authorities, as we've seen recently in the Netherlands. So I think we need to look at the whole landscape to understand what's threatened and how to counter the negative effects of technological power. So I would mention particularly the work of Professor van Dijk, of, for instance, Cede Gerses and Joris van Hoboken on infrastructure and optimization, and how the cloud is one invisible engine of technological power. Other researchers would include Aviva de Groot and others working on the problem posed by systems such as Siri to violations of rights in the Netherlands. Professor Tamar Sharon at the iHub at Radboud on the implications of technology firms transitioning between spheres of operation. What happens when we find defense contractors working on migration or search experts working on health. I was also interested in what Professor Zuboff said about this notion of the epistemic coup, how technology actually affects our understanding of the world because we're starting to live within technology instead of just using it. It makes me think of the work on recommender systems and search by Nathalie Helberger, for instance, at Amsterdam, on profiling by Professor Mireille Hildebrandt at Radboud. And there's a lot of great work going on the anthropology of technology to understand how social behavior shapes tech and vice versa. Professor Zuboff also says that liberal democracies have failed to construct a coherent political vision of a digital century that advances democratic values, principles, and government. But is this true? We can look at many, many nations out of the nearly 200 around the world that have a very clear grip on what they want from technology. They just don't all feel exactly the same way. In the project that I lead, the Global Data Justice Project, we try to look at how we can reconcile those differing points of view on what is good use of technology if we want to govern technology globally, which is actually the challenge, not just governing Silicon Valley, but governing tech as a global facilitator of good and of things that we don't like. I'd like to highlight also the work of several Dutch researchers working in this field. Payal Arora, for instance, at Erasmus, shows that India and Brazil and other countries where patriarchal control is very strong, young people particularly see technology, despite all of the commercial surveillance going on, as privacy preserving and emancipatory in comparison to the forced transparency they have in their family environment, in their households. The work of Stefania Milan and her group at Amsterdam shows how data technologies can be used both for surveillance and for emancipation. She has a new book called COVID-19 from the Margins, which looks at how the pandemic has affected advances in technological power and how it helps to look at those from a Southern as well as a Northern perspective, which I think is really valuable. We also have a lot of researchers working on the intersection of values and technology in general. Researchers such as Albert Meijer at Utrecht, working on public governance, Esther Keimolen and Merel Norman, who are colleagues of mine at Tilburg, working on the philosophy of technology. Similarly, Sally Wyatt, Challing Sveerstra at Maastricht, the work of 40U, their coalition on shaping ethical technology, and of technical specialists themselves working on the social science of technology in some ways and the politics, such as Jaap Henk Hoekman and Bart Jacobs. If you bring the work of all these scholars together, both social scientific, humanities-based, and technical, you start to get an answer to the questions that Professor Zuboff is posing. Finally, in relation to her larger question, do we need new rights for the digital world, and are our legal frameworks adequate? I would agree with her that if you're in the US, this really seems like a problem. But out of the nearly 200 countries in the world that are all shaping technological power in their own ways, if we just take the EU as a single regional bloc, we can see that we have a lot of laws that can be better enforced. The work of Bart van der Sloot and Bart Schermers shows that if we enforce our laws on surveillance rather than making new ones, we might be doing fine. Frederik Borgesius, similarly at Radboud, is showing how fundamental rights can be enforced by means of existing national law and EU law. And there's work going on at law and tech institutes all over the Netherlands, including my own, Tilt at Tilburg, which shows that we do have an apparatus in place to help us both think through and deal with the kind of problems that Professor Zuboff is highlighting. We just need to do a good job of working together to understand how we should do that. And with that, I'll pass it over to the Q&A.
Associate Professor at the Tilburg Institute for Law, Technology and Society, Tilt. That was an awful lot to unpack. My mind is still, especially because I spoke to Professor Zuboff as well, and you referenced helpless children. I just wrote that down, referring to what Zuboff said. And you also referred to a lot of other people that have done work in this field. But I'm interested in you as an individual. What do you actually think of the threats that Zuboff describes? Do you agree with the way she is bringing them to us, or do you say it's a bit exaggerated, to be very blunt and plain?
I don't think it's exaggerated at all. I think that it's very much the perspective of a US scholar from particular disciplinary backgrounds. We're all governed by a disciplinary background. And I think that in her book, which is extensive, Professor Zuboff does a great job of bringing together lots of research that's been done on this. But I certainly don't think that data is ungovernable. I think it's within our capacity to govern it. I think we have good tools for governing it. I think it's largely a problem of political will. And that speaks to the question you asked the audience at the start of this. Do we think that we should be activists? I'm very aware that being considered an activist is the opposite of being considered a scholar in the Netherlands. But I don't think that's true. I think that we need to try to integrate how we feel about technology with the work that we do on it. And we shouldn't stand back and pretend that we're fully objective on how technology shapes our world. And if we do that as scholars, we will do better work on controlling and governing it.
What I find interesting is also that you spoke of the book COVID-19 from the Margins. What you're also seeing is that, for example, in a country like where I was born, Uganda, social media has played a big role in the opposition. Bobby Wine wouldn't have been as big or known around the world without Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. But at the same time, those companies that Shoshanna Zuboff describes are sort of like in cahoots with the government when they shut down the internet or censor themselves in any way or form. And my question to you was, do you believe in the strength of government, even in the upcoming countries, but also closer to home in Europe? And we had riots in the Netherlands and people were discussing maybe we should intervene. Do you believe that the governments are strong enough to stand up and even implement the already existing tools that they have?
I think if we believe ourselves as citizens to be separate from our government, we're in big trouble. I believe not in government per se, but in the potential of government. In the government that we can shape and that we can inform as researchers and as citizens. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Now, okay, but I'm just thinking about Australia and where Google's nearly sort of like pulled some sort of like mafia move by saying, hey, we'll cut down the search, we won't give you a search option if you go ahead with the legislation that you're proposing because you don't agree with our ethics. You could say that's a fight normal citizens can't win, especially when they're dealing with other things like a pandemic.
I think the word ethics is getting used very broadly with regard to technology right now. I think that Australia is engaged in one struggle of many possible struggles about supporting its domestic media industry and asking search engines which don't agree that they're publishers to acknowledge that they are publishers and to give the media its due. The media is struggling because of copyright and also because of the work of journalists being taken and distributed for free. I think we should have a discussion about whether we're all okay with that or not. I don't think it's a very simple discussion, and I know lots of scholars who are working on this and doing very well.
In the meantime, if you have questions, please pose them through the Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen. Getting back to the COVID-19 from the Margins, what more can you tell us about our own blind spot in the West, about the chances and the opportunities that this data economy gives us while we're busy focusing on the battles that Professor Zuboff is fighting and others with her?
Well, data is many things. Data is a source of a huge engine for economic development if used rightly. It's a source of power for activists. I too have been following what's going on with the Ugandan election, and I was excited to see activists tweeting that they probably wouldn't have got out of jail if it hadn't been for the international and national attention being drawn to their plight, because they were so visible. And people used not to be visible when they were put in jail. That was the point of putting activists in jail and politicians in jail. It's not working quite so well now, and that's a very pleasant thing to see.
Yeah.
So I definitely believe in the power of technology to do good, but technology is not neutral. It matters that technology is present in the game now. It's not as if it's this neutral force that a mythical we can shape. It comes from technology and it comes from society and politics and governance, and it feeds into society, politics, and governance. And so we have to treat it as intersecting with all of the things we're interested in rather than separate from those things.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to some of the questions. Sylvia is saying, so if politicians are involved in using our data wrongfully to get elected, then what are their incentives to pass the laws we need to protect ourselves from the theft you describe?
This is a great question. I think that I outlined some of the work that goes to answering that question in my brief statement earlier. I'm excited about the potential of data protection and privacy laws, but what we study in our project is how those are not enough on their own. It needs to be both and. We need competition law, consumer law, we need anti-discrimination law, we need fundamental human rights law. And we don't need to fundamentally re-envision our democracies any more than we're trying to do already in the face of populism and oppression around the world. I think that we should look into how technology can be used to support activism, particularly, which a lot of great scholars here in the Netherlands are doing, including Stefania Milan and her group at Amsterdam. This is their particular focus, and I very much support the work they're doing. But it's not rocket science to enforce our laws better than we are right now. These are political choices, and we see them playing out differently in different countries. But usually, if you look at a country that's torturing people, you'll see that torture is forbidden in its constitution. If you look at a company that is violating privacy, you will see that its own mission statement says it shouldn't be doing that. So within the realm of self-regulation and legal regulation, we see that we have a lot of tools that we could be using to enforce what we want from technology. And we need to find routes to doing that, which is a very different challenge from passing new laws and inventing new rights.
Okay, let me go to another question. Ivan, Zuboff discussed that we have already lost if we talk about data, and that we need to ask more upstream questions about what can be turned into data to begin with. How can we get such questions on the agenda when political institutes, including the EU themselves, primarily talk about the benefits of data and dealing with the risks by giving people all the ability to request, move, and manage our data? It's a very long question. Did you get it? Yeah?
That is the right question to be asking. All along, there's been a struggle between those who believe that data is the fourth industrial revolution, that it's the engine of our economies now, and that therefore it should be left alone to do its work. And those who believe that data is connected to a political and infrastructural reality, and that it does the work of that reality. Does that make sense? So I would point here very strongly to the work being done at Delft by Seda Gurses, who looks at how various infrastructures, including the cloud, but also financial infrastructures and organizational infrastructures, lead to the technology we see before us. And so I agree that we need to go upstream. We need to look at what is creating the technology that creates the effects. Otherwise, we're just looking at the symptoms.
But if we continue with that, and we had a discussion about the European Union and how there is civic activity and bottom-up, but there's also a lot of lobbying and lobbyists, and they also represent those big companies. And to make it smaller, like if you watch a TV show in Holland about family feuds, out of the 10 feuds, 2 are now Facebook or Instagram based, where somebody got caught up in a bubble, started a quarrel with a neighbor, and years of friendship were nearly thrown over the bridge until they found out they were victims of You know what I'm trying to say. Like, how can we deal with those micro things that are actually representative of a bigger problem that we have, or challenge that we have?
Happily, we've had family feuds for millennia. I'm not sure that's going to change if we get rid of all of the technology in the world.
So it's just basically getting used to this new thing that's out there. I like your positivity, though.
As I said, I don't believe the tech is neutral. Okay. I really don't. I think it matters that tech is in the picture. It matters that we discuss it. We shouldn't pretend it's not there. Okay. But families will always feud, and people will always grab for economic advantage, and people will always take unfair advantage of others. And this is not just because of technology. People take unfair advantage of others because others are unfairly disadvantaged, because the world allows them to do that. And so I'm in favor of applying our existing rules and laws and ethics intelligently to technology so that we take account of new modes of action without losing the point of those laws and rules and ethics.
I have another question from Kavish. He's asking, is the GDPR privacy law enough to protect the data privacy of European citizens? If no, what should be done more?
That's an excellent question. It's one I've been wrestling with for about a decade now. My answer, as before, is yes, and. It's really good at addressing the problems of corporate surveillance, such as Professor Zuboff lays them out. I think it does give us tools to have some control over our data. What it doesn't give us tools to look at, though, is the broader effects of data in the sense that we are now profiled as groups as well as individuals, that what you do with your privacy settings, Andrew, affects what tech companies know about me, that we are no longer just in control of our fates as individuals, but our fates are linked by the technologies we use. And the GDPR wasn't formed with a full knowledge of what that would turn into over the decade after it was conceptualized. So I think we need to think more about group privacy, about aggregate effects of data, and about how data changes economic opportunities, changes ways of discriminating, changes various things for groups in a way that a law that envisages us as individuals making claims doesn't necessarily cover. So I think it's both and.
Both and. And what role does science and the social sciences and humanities play in this? Do you think that as academia, there's enough discussion about which way we're heading?
Apart from the research we discuss almost nothing else. I think it's time to really link the work being done on tech back into the world of social sciences and humanities more broadly. I worry that some people are getting left out.
In what sense?
Because there's a ton of funding about tech, as if tech were the problem. And tech is a manifestation of broader issues, which we already do a really good job of analyzing. And so I want to live in a next decade of research funding, particularly, where we link all these things together and we say, the philosophers are researching technology as well. The historians are researching it as well. It's not just the people who label their work as being about tech who are researching immediate and important issues shaping the world, shaping our digitizing world.
It leads me to ask, do you think that tech companies themselves are aware enough that there's more aspects or elements that they could recruit from or ask for advice? Even though you as academia are already dealing with the discussions, you might not be heard by the companies themselves.
I think the ideal outcome of our research is that we don't need to be heard by the companies to make a difference. I'm not sure that the difference will come from the companies. I think the difference comes from states and from citizens. And it's our job to learn how to shape the behavior of companies. We've done this in different realms. We're trying to do this with regard to the fossil fuel economy. There are various issues where we've managed to shape the behavior of companies because it became manifestly obvious we had to do that. I think we're at that point, as Professor Zuboff correctly says, with technology. But no, I don't expect Facebook to care about what I say because they disagree with me on almost everything. And so I look to politics and I look to activism to make my point. And I look to civil society around the world to find points of agreement, to find points of leverage. And I look to international institutions as well as national ones to recognize that we need to work on this together, rather than trying to ask companies to behave better, which has seldom worked in the history of capitalism.
Associate Professor at Tilburg Institute for Law, Technology and Society, Linnet Taylor. Can I ask you as a final question, if we would have, as I asked Professor Zuboff, 10 years from now, like how is this going to, are we going to be having the same discussion, or are we going to be inspired by all these things you mentioned earlier? What do you think?
I think this is a generational problem, kind of like climate change. I think we're going to get a grip on it over time, and it's going to change as our grip on it changes. If we see anything, it's that the firms that are involved in the problems Professor Zuboff outlines and that we're all working on in my field, they change their behavior to suit law and regulation. They're entrepreneurial, but they don't just push back, they invent new ways to do what they do. That's both a good thing. This is how technology works. We need innovation. And it suggests that we need to keep this discussion going and let it grow with the technology. So that's what I advocate.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your perspective. And it's triggered me, and I think many of our viewers, to take a step back and look at things from a different angle after hearing Professor Zuboff and also our other guests today. Thank you so much, Linnet Taylor.
Thank you very much.